And good morning. Right, I appreciate my footage isn't as smooth as previous days. Using essentially a big zoom lens with no inbuilt stabilisation, just using an in-body stabiliser. I actually walked down here so I could be still. It's the walk and the talk that I normally like to do, and things are a little bit shaky, so I thought, well, we need to stand on stable ground. That's probably true of a lot of things. But the differences here is that I'm using a microphone that's up close to my mouth. Normally I use a shotgun microphone made by Rode. Always happy to mention them. Australian-made company. I'm here in Australia. I do believe in support your local economy and buy. Big fan of bricks and mortar stores. But there are things we can do as consumers that, I don't know, support the world we wish to live in, I suppose. Alright, so the thought of today that motivated me to get out of bed and have a talk about a topic was to do with what I see as the entertainment industry, but specifically the video game industry, because it became big dollars a decade or a couple of decades ago, such that the companies wanted to get involved. Like Microsoft created a console because they could see there was money in it. We could say Sony had built a console, but they'd been commissioned by Nintendo to design bring a CD-ROM console to market. And at the last minute, Nintendo had kind of gone, well, no, we don't want it. And they'd essentially built themselves a competitor because the work had already been done. And so, for whatever reason, some of these players came to market. Some of them had folded in that same time frame. I mean, we had the 3DO. Companies like Atari and Sega had put out last-ditch efforts, and for whatever reasons, had then packed up and left the market. For Sega, it was a little bit sad, actually. They put out a perfect console. It had literally one of each type of game, all the different game genres, pretty much on console launch, which is what you do as a first party. You have knowledge that you're building a platform before time, and your first party studios are meant to have software ready for launch. They can be told the secret of the new hardware that's coming out. They know what the specifications of it will be, and they build software accordingly. But the Sega was nearly a perfect console, and it had one of each type of game that a person could wish for on release. All the different genres, be it a race game and a fighting game and an action adventure game, and there's just a range of games that if you want to build up a nice collection, pretty much on launch, you had every type of game you just about needed, and they were all really well rated. That was a little bit different. Normally you don't get an A+ rated game of every genre type on console launch. The problem for the Sega was it got hacked too early. Essentially you could put a boot disc in. You didn't even have to pay for a mod chip, which was all the vogue at the time. If you wanted to play copied games on a PlayStation, you'd get the thing chipped, right? That's the street term, I suppose. And with the Sega, you could just burn a disc and then use that as a boot disc and then rotate your discs in. Now, it was a little bit trickier than that. If you wanted your console to live any amount of time, the particular method that was used in it, I think it was a quasi, whatever the next generation of disc was, which I think at the time was Blu-ray over DVD, and there might have been they could squeeze more per disc by using potentially this dual data format, don't know. But they did read from the outside in, which was very different to every other method out there. And it just meant if you were making your copied discs and if you actually cared about your laser, not the tracking motors and everything in your unit not getting absolutely worn out, you'd create a dummy file of whatever the blank amount of data was needed in order to fill the disc up, so that the data that you wanted to be written to the edge of the disc would be at the end of the file, right? And would therefore be at the outside of the disc when the unit wanted to read them. And at the time on the market, black blanks, that is discs that looked very much alike the Dreamcast blank discs, actually turned up in the markets that you could buy blank media that looked identical. It's a fantastic console, right? We didn't need to hack it. I myself bought another one for the cupboard, and I had bought all my discs pretty much on launch, with the big weakness being that the visual memory units never came to market in time, and they were needed for saving your game. And so I'd played the Sonic Adventure game way too many times by the time I could finally save my game. I didn't really care to do the same opening levels over and over and over again. But it was a great console, needless to say. And some consoles have come and gone. Where the joke at the moment, or the discussion in the industry, is that Microsoft is thinking about doing a Sega, and that is backing out of the hardware component and making money just selling their software. They bought so many studios. That was always going to be an option for them. But the reason why you own a platform is that for every bit of software that's sold on said platform, you get a little bit of the coin. You get money from licensed peripherals, arguably. And I mean, in the case of Microsoft, it's been storage. They've been selling the world's dumbest solid-state drives with no controller chips, arguably. Hence why they're so small, but they don't sell them at a cheap price point. No. That's actually been a large profit margin area for them. Hence why the software that you download is never reduced in size. Typically the PlayStation size of the same games is reduced. And over the last couple of generations of consoles, various techniques were used to expedite the seek time on discs. So in going back to the PlayStation 4 era, where games weren't installed compulsorily. It might be the PS3 era. I might be getting my ears. It's been a lot of gaming consoles, it feels like. I mean, it's generally once every 7 years, but feels like we've gone through a lot of tech. But in the PS3 era, for example, a game like Skyrim, they'd put the files on the disc twice, so that at any given point when the disc needed to track, it could track in whatever direction was closest to find the files that were needed. And that would reduce the seek times, something which solid-state drives basically don't have. And it would expedite the loading, or allow the game data to get loaded quicker, right? So it was a good notion. But as we transitioned to hard drives, and the game's loading always from hard drive, even if we bought them on disk, you couldn't play them on disk anymore. So you needed to have large drives for storage. And for a while there, we had the double up of files, I believe. I'm not sure if it was a remnant, if it was leftover baggage, if you will, for the way we had been doing things. But we certainly didn't need it in the transition to solid-state drives. And so some companies seem to have been nicer with regards to that. I don't know. I don't know if Sony's... They wouldn't have access on third-party media, I would imagine, to trim the files per se for the newer console updates. But I do notice on the Sony store fairly consistently that quite often there'll be a difference in the file sizes between the PS4 and the PS5, and it's not just to do with textures. And then we also notice with the Xbox side of the coin that they seem to be quite happy to lump the Xbox Series S and Series X version together in such a way as to blow out the drive storage space, so that consumers who, again, Microsoft's one profit segment pretty much in the last 10 years has consistently proven to be in these drives, have been a profitable little thing for them. I guess we could say in the Sony ecosystem that they don't limit what you can do with the drives. You certainly don't have to buy licensed drives, and therefore, if we're looking at in a competitive fashion where Microsoft has made its money better than the competitors, we could say, drives being licensed, hence double down on that. But it's a little bit more insidious with regards to Microsoft falling backwards out of the hardware market, because they did a lot of dirty things in an attempt to get users onto their consoles where they could make money from licensed peripherals, drive sales, and annual network costs. In the PC space, they didn't have any of that. Now we can say, well, Games Pass also worked in the PC space. And it's like, well, did it? Did it really? Did all games work in the PC space with Games Pass? And the quality then of the PC gaming experience in a Microsoft ecosystem with forced driver updates, forced platform updates, forced DirectX updates, and then just game jank. Like, we've got things like pre-building shaders, which, if you don't change your hardware configuration from build to build, should just be a menu option. saying, oh, I don't need to rebuild them this time. Just let me continue. Because that is used as creating jank on the platform, as is a lot of other... Microsoft, being intentionally dirty, did things like not update the hardware scheduler. They, many, many years ago, they reached out to all the various market players, everyone, from your keyboard manufacturer to your mouse manufacturer to your sound applets, everything to just need to use your CPU, right? Widgets, right? Things that by forcing games into a windowed mode and by forcing a desktop compiler to be constantly focusing on so many little things, they managed to find ways that basically getting a smooth gaming experience on a PC would require a huge amount of brute forcing in order to make it happen. And then some of the requirements to actually allow it to happen smoothly were basically moved to Windows 11 only in a way to force consumers forward. And most of the constant Windows 10 rollouts and Windows 11 rollouts was just because Microsoft counted them as Xbox installs. So accidentally upgrading your machine 3 times to Windows 10 when you didn't want it and kept saying, I don't want it, right? That was for Microsoft, was 4 Xboxes in the market. When you finally got upgraded against your wishes again. And then you just went, no, that's it, I'll just leave it on because the downtime and the difficulties and having my data wiped just isn't worth it. So in my yesterday's video, I made mention of a firmware update that was done to my battery that I say in the video that it stopped my laptop charging, but it's actually, again, I'll use the word insidious. It was a little bit darker than just stopping my battery from charging. It actually stopped the laptop from being able to work off its charger. This is a known issue that had been in the market for 6 years, and the company Lenovo didn't want to know about the fact that, oh yeah, there's a forced update by Microsoft that's actually costing you guys a lot of money. And the example I gave was that Lenovo had swapped out about 6 or 7 parts in my laptop trying to get a handle on it. Mostly because their tech support channels didn't want to actually engage with me, to be told where the issue is and why. Ah dear, responsibility, right? Nobody wants responsibility. Everyone just wants to just turn up, bums on seats, get their paycheck and get out. You see that with the big companies. So this is what I find really sad, is that the support cycle, which has become compulsory, so let's transition over to the software side of things, certainly Microsoft is that we need to get support now with our software, and that out the gate it's not a working version, so it needs updates. Right now, in particular, it could just be that the genres of games I play are complex story games, and generally open world story games are the ones that need the most amount of patches. The rule of thumb being for decades that you don't generally wish to play them out of the box on day one of launch, right? Because it's just impossible for their games testers to have checked all the permutations of possibility in an open world game with branching story and branching dialogues and branching everything. So you wait for the patches. Anyway, it's been a busy period. Last few months, it's been a large amount of really good quality open world story games that have come out. And the problem I've found is that basically on release, they've all needed patches. And the studios have moved on from them in such a small amount of time that some of them are actually announcing that's our last patch. Outside of like requisite broken patches, like patches we might need to put out. Like basically, yeah, that's probably it. And I mean, the state of these games is atrocious. An example of the one that's just said, oh yeah, that's us, we're done. After having received that last patch, I went in to finally start playing it. And this is the chicken or the egg, is who's going to play a game that's not finished? And these companies go, well, no one's playing our game, let's stop supporting it. Right, let's not release anything for it. And it's like, well, yeah, we know your game's released at a horrible, buggy state, that they're not worth touching for a few months. Anyway, due to the nature of sales, trying to generate software sales units in those first couple of months, the keeping up with the Joneses principle being that people will potentially buy into the software if other people have, it must be good if other people are playing it. And I'd actually bought some of the software early because of how cheap it was, knowing I'd get around to playing it, and actually having found the quality of said software to be really fun, even though the internet was saying it wasn't, that it was too woke or something. And I actually found, I can't say I found the opposite of that. I didn't play it deep enough in to see the shallowness or the depth of certain conversations, but I really liked the game that was there. I've actually found it was a really top quality game, a lot of fun to play. And yeah, to get this final patch, and so my partner had created a character and we'd played it a fair few hours in. And by a fair few hours in, I mean I'd clocked up, let's say 20 hours, enough to sample the game, but also enough to realise that some of the patches that had come out had made the game quite unplayable. We'd just wait for further patches. And in the state of doing that, when this end of life patch came out, less than 3 months after the game had launched, we lost our save game. That is to say, we had a few save files, and we could go in and we go, okay, well, there's the character that my partner spent a lot of time creating, the one we'd put all the time in playing, and then here's these other save games where I'd just, to check out new builds or new hardware, like I'll just run with them for a little bit and see how it plays compared to the first game experience. Anyway, I've come in to resume my game 20 odd hours in, and a save game bug with the deletion of them had actually made it so I deleted the wrong save games, even though by the name of the characters, and even though I double checked and loaded them up, went, yeah, okay, that's that branch, cool, that's that one there, right, okay, well I can delete that one, and we lost our gameplay time. Now it's not really the gameplay time, arguably I can put that back in, but for me it's, my partner had actually gone the effort in the character creator of putting some time in and making a character that we wanted to investigate their story, right? We were invested, and we'd put the time in. You could argue we also invested in the software. We bought it, and the studios now have the option of releasing half-baked software. We can say, well, that's on them if they don't then sell it very well because they launched it too early or it was only half-baked. But there was a time that we as consumers had belief that it was going to get support, right? So goodwill, sure, we can argue that over the last couple of years, goodwill has been lost. We could also say that Cyberpunk took anybody wanting to pre-order games, just it's like, don't do that anymore, that's no longer a thing, stop it. But it's not just Cyberpunk. And with these games that have now come out just recently that show, and I'm talking now, there's a few games that within a few months have deemed, that's it, we're pretty much not supporting that product anymore. We don't deem it commercially viable. Well, if you don't deem it commercially viable now, like, consumers aren't going to buy your next product. You wonder why it is that people aren't pre-ordering these products. Like, these big companies take this attitude, well, why don't they pre-order? You know, like, fire the game director and do this and do that. This is no good. It's like, well, no. Your company is dirty. You've lost this little thing called goodwill. And goodwill used to be worth about 10% of the value of purchase price. Not so much in video gaming, but in bricks and mortar stores. A business measurement from, I'm going to go with the early 90s, when I would have been going through school, it was explained to me the value of goodwill. And I didn't think it was worth enough. But it was an intangible concept, arguably. We didn't have the internet, we didn't have feedback 5-star systems that were so easy to gauge. And the cost of establishing goodwill at that time in the market would have been an expensive, it would have been almost an impossibility. And now, at the time when goodwill is the easiest thing to measure, it's, well, in real time, maybe, don't know. We can't just bend our knee to flavour of the moment internet discussion. Otherwise, a very vocal subset of people, and or there is companies like Microsoft do pay for people to come in and just flood. The media engine is too buyable. So no company, arguably. We don't want the market to go to what do the ratings say? Flavour of the moment ratings say. Because the companies will just throw the money at whatever's the most cost-effective way. And if just buying up opinions is the most cost-effective way rather than building good software, then that will be the next war zone. But I look at the software that's come out, I look at the time in which these companies have bailed on their own products that have taken many, many years to bring to market, and that just a small amount of extra time would turn these products into good long-term products. And the only takeaway I can really glean is it's the same in the movie industry, where if it's cheaper to make it a tax write-off rather than release it, that they do that. There's perfectly good movies out there that just haven't been released because the studios have gone, well, you know what? As a tax write-off, we're going to make more money on that product right there, right now. And I mean, who knows what then the long-term profits become. A movie that didn't get released in a given period because it worked well for the studio. But if it's already been done and the final cut's already been made, what's to say it can't be released down the track, right? And it's the same with this software, that it typically goes on to sell with large amounts of time. It's just a thing, right? Like, these games can be remastered or remade. That's one aspect of looking at it, sure. But then websites like Good Old Games are quite happy to sell us the products as they existed 20 odd years ago. And that's a market unto itself. And it might just be because everybody's bending their knee to modern ideologies and ways of doing things, that the older products built at a time when the studios had an aspect of resilience or believed in their products, arguably were smaller and the investments were less, and so the risks were less, and therefore could do more niche products. Or, I mean, there's a range of things here we could talk about. None of them are good to compress into such a short video. But this notion of these companies being allowed to bail on these products and the consumer hesitancy that it then creates. Well, why would I buy now any game in the first 3 months? And now there are studios I trust, but I have finite money that I'm willing to invest in entertainment. In fact, my household moved many years ago to buying games years after they came out because it just allowed us to buy more games annually. We still get to play all the games, and if anything, we get to play the complete versions of them, versions that are properly patched and run well. So, arguably, the games industry is shooting itself in the feet. It really is. And all the biggest players, the bigger the company, the more it's boardroom decisions that influence these things. And they just play the numbers games, which sadly often means that they release their games, and within 3 months they've devalued their games to such an extent that certainly with any of, I mean, I will outright say their names, being Ubisoft, Electronic Arts, and Microsoft. Microsoft might not be quite as bad as those first two with regards to the speed with which they devalue their primary assets. But it's certainly become a thing. And then the flip side of this, there is a much darker subset, a darker side to this coin, or another whole aspect of this industry, which is the paid-for tech demo, right? It's the only way NVIDIA has products to show the fact that they've got their toes in multiple markets. Now it's artificial intelligence and Hollywood, as well as gaming, right? So years ago, they needed to make cards for Hollywood still, and AMD decided, we're just making video cards for gaming, so we'll build a perfect card for gaming. And NVIDIA went, hang on, we're still stuck trying to lower our cost of silicon so we can be attractive in the market, and we still have to dedicate a huge amount of our video card to rendering for Hollywood. So now we're going to make that aspect of the die essential to gaming, and we'll pay for tech demos, basically. We'll pay for a bunch of studios to hoodwink in Hollywood light sourcing at a really poor level. Like, even Hollywood render overnight. Like, the games basically went from hundreds of frames a second down to tiny little amounts, and then NVIDIA had to put out supplemental technologies like DLSS so that consumers would go, yeah, it's good now. Yeah, this is essential. And therefore, like a self-fulfilling prophecy, it would just keep them in the market. But now that they've had to move into artificial intelligence, and they're putting the cost again on consumers, 15 out of 16 pixels being fake using artificial intelligence, and of course makes next gen's product more attractive because it'll be a much more refined product, it'll do it better. So they know they've bought a cycle and they've created a product methodology that will have legs. And yet again, they're back to buying their way into the industry. Now, what I was going to lead with is the dark side here, is that companies like Warner being able to be so easily bought. Now, in part, they're dirty for their own reasons. That is to say, when Hogwarts Legacy needed to be made end of life. Now, that's a crazy concept to me, right? I just want people to understand. I'm not a cynic. I call it as I see it. But what actually happened with Hogwarts Legacy when the new Quidditch game was coming out, they put out a hotfix patch, and they basically curtailed the use of 3 gigabytes of VRAM use in Hogwarts Legacy and made the game run really poorly. But that particular patch fixed 2 things in the game. There was an animation in a store or something, and there was one other thing, right? They tried to pretend it was a patch we needed. And then there was a big ad for the new game that would start every time you'd start the game, or every second time you get a big, here, buy Quidditch. It was basically a glorified ad that we'd forcibly had to download because we're now in a world of forced updates. And I didn't care for the new game, but I did care for the fact that they'd made my old game end of life. And it was basically impossible to tune around. And it was almost like a 1-2 hit, like Microsoft themselves put out an update which sort of looked like it changed the way the page file worked in Windows. But it basically became impossible to run the game, as I'd been doing it flawlessly for a couple of years. And I had a video card with more than enough RAM, but they'd be dropping the world chunks from RAM so quickly, and then it would make all your subsets choke. And so all of a sudden your page file was just, everything in the computer was just being hit hard, and it was getting a frame rate jankiness. But they did it on purpose. They deemed that there's only so many fans for their particular IP, and that they needed to, shooting fish in a barrel, they needed to move them forward. And so they did that. It was quite unethical. But now, then we had the PlayStation 5 Pro, where they put out an update for that, for the ray tracing, that was just epic. And they fixed all the ray tracing issues that have been on PC since day one that you couldn't complain about. And it's weird, their complaints department, because when, for example, they put the end-of-life patch up, I'd put the complaints in and they would shut them down. Most complaints would sit there for weeks or months to gather, do other people also experience this? But every eloquent patch, every complaint I put up regarding 3 gig of RAM is no longer VRAM is no longer being used, it's leading to these horrible stutters. And I would write it in plain language, I'd write it in tech. I've been tech support, I've been in the receiving department of where they're at. I wrote it right to address the issue, and they would just keep shutting the tickets down. And so you could say, oh, were they just deeming that I was being annoying? But no, they were shutting down tickets from other people too on similar things. And they basically just tried to sweep it under the rug. Anyway, then they put out the PS5 Pro patch, where all of a sudden a whole bunch of patches that were actually needed for story elements of the game, because the game hadn't really been updated for many, many, many months, all of a sudden were being redressed. And all the poor seams with the ray tracing were all fixed around Hogwarts, and everything seemed to be done really well. But that patch didn't come to PC. And now Nvidia are putting out a new video card and needing it to be supporting their technologies. Magically Hogwarts is good again, apparently. Now, don't get me wrong, I'll go home now, I'll run that new update. I'll try it on the competitor's technology, right? Because it was written to use the competitor's technology. So all the frame gen, Fluid Motion Frames 2, used to work perfectly. And I've got a card good enough to do ray tracing, and I can play the game with everything set to Ultra. So I'll go home and I'll check it. But I'm pretty confident it's going to be an NVIDIA de-optimized title. And just the fact that these software companies can come in after the fact, and either studios bury their own games, or as paid for adverts for other tech products, can bury the effectiveness or the usability of the game that we previously had. It's no longer a case of optimization, it's for improving, right? Where these patches are no longer for we, the end users. From every device we have, the firmware updates, the security updates is generally to turn off aspects of our CPUs and make them run poorer, so we're forced forward. And we've really now transitioned into a world where not only do we pay for the data for the download, not only do we pay for the permanent internet connection to maintain these companies having the power over our products and our software, but we foot the bill at every level, and there's certainly no stability in the purchases we're making. Right? So I don't know about you, but if I have to work hard for my money, entertainment as a reward, or these high-tech gizmos as a reward or a lifestyle choice, is something that I feel I earn. And nowadays, everything is the adage of, oh no, you're just renting it. And at any given moment, we can flick a switch and turn it off because you're a fat cat and we need your money. Anyway, I'm going to say well wishes with. It's a glorious day. May you be well.